Good morning and welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church. My name is Pastor David Bonema, and it is good to be in worship with you this morning. And thank you to all who are live streaming. I am glad that you are tuning in to worship this morning as well. Let's begin with a couple of announcements. The first is a really kind of exciting one. Unity members Walter and Sybil Johnson are celebrating their 75th wedding anniversary. I mean, how about that? 75 years. Congratulations, Walter and Sybil. We are so happy and enthusiastic for you. If you would like to congratulate them, their family is hosting a drive-by congratulations today from 1 to 2 p.m., just right here in the church parking lot. And so anytime between 1 and 2, you can drive by. Walter and Sybil will be out there, and you can just say, congratulations on 75 years of marriage. Next announcement, some of you are now beginning to receive your vaccines, which we're very excited about. and you're wondering, okay, so what does church look like moving forward? When will church feel normal again? Which is a great question that we're all kind of wondering. But here at the church, we're going to slowly, like a dimmer switch, slowly get back to normal. Basically, right now, we allow up to 50 people in worship in person. We will be tracking the rates of community transmission with COVID, and as hopefully the vaccines increase, the community transmission will decrease, and as the session pays attention to that, we'll operate the church like a dimmer switch to say, okay, it's looking a little bit better, maybe we can turn up the dial a little bit, allow a few more people in, that sort of thing. So it will be gradual, but it will be intentional, as hopefully we will be nearing the end of beating this horrible pandemic. There's a video that we wanted to show you that kind of shares a little bit about our thinking and where we're headed. So let's go ahead and show that video.
In January 2020, we welcomed a new year, and our lives were not much different than the year before. But that didn't last.
Probably came to realize that COVID-19 was going to change the way we do education in early February.
There were a lot of emotions that we experienced as a staff, as a pastoral group.
When it became clear that COVID-19 would require us to evacuate our campus, we immediately were concerned for the safety of our students.
March 13th was a very normal school day. However, we sensed something coming and started trying to come up with plans. And all of a sudden, we had to change everything.
And so we reacted. We locked down, buckled down, stocked up, masked up, and we changed the way we interacted with the world.
I think we're able to reach people in new ways that maybe we wouldn't have been able to reach in an in-person or more traditional worship setting.
Working together, figuring out, what's going to work in your setting, and can we borrow that idea? And people were so generous.
Our whole administrative team and school team, our support staff were fantastic, and our professional staff, our teachers, everybody rose to the occasion.
And while we mourn the things we've lost, we anticipate with joy the things we look forward to rediscovering. Those special moments when we once again gather to hug, laugh, pray, teach, and share with those we care about and miss.
The thing I'm looking forward to the most is being able to share meals with our families again.
The thing I look forward to most in a post-COVID-19 environment is seeing our graduates embrace one another in celebration of a job well done and a degree earned.
The thing I'm looking forward to most is some measure of consistency.
What I look forward to is all the residents can get together for a birthday party. All the families can come in and do dining and all those types of activities that really kind of warms your heart.
We will recover. We will rediscover. Amazing people have done amazing things during COVID-19. We will return to our communities with renewed vigor, ready to inspire and serve in old and new ways, grateful for the opportunity to be together once again.
We have done plenty of adapting in this last year, but we're not unique in that. All churches have had to adapt, and we will probably have some more adapting ahead of us yet to come. But we do it together, and we know that someday, eventually, this will end. And so what I really like in that video is it says, what are you looking forward to? When that day comes, what are you looking forward to? And I think I look forward to just seeing this vibrant church all together in one space. Whenever that's going to happen, that's going to be a beautiful moment. And so just keep the faith, and we'll keep announcements coming as we know more. A couple of prayer requests. Please continue to be in prayer for Terry Linker, who continues in the hospital, and be in prayer for those residents at the Lakewood home that have experienced that COVID outbreak. Now, let us worship together.
Soul, the Lord is on thy side. undertake to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, the waves and winds still know his voice who ruled them while he dwelt below. Be still, my soul, the hour is hasting on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, when change and tears are past. All safe and blessed, we shall meet at last.
Good morning, friends. I hope you're all having a wonderful Sunday morning. It's a little rainy out, kind of cold, but I bet it's still fantastic because you are here with us this morning. So, stories. Stories are such an important part of our lives. We have bedtime stories. We have funny stories we tell to our friends. Our parents and grandparents tell us stories about when they were kids. And that's how we learn. Stories teach us things. And as Christians, we learn lots of stories. We learn about Noah's Ark. We learn about Joseph's coat of many colors. And the most important story is we learn about Jesus. And what a wonderful story that is. It is so awesome. And in the Bible, we learn about a guy named Paul. And David's going to talk a little bit about Paul today, I believe. And Paul, he told stories. He went out and told a lot of people the story of Jesus. And he told all kinds of people, and those people, they told their family and friends, and then they told their family and friends, and they just kept passing it down on and on and on. And here today, we learn those same stories that Paul told all those people in the Bible. That's so cool, right? I mean, if we are learning the same stories that Paul was teaching, it must be a really important story, right? The one about Jesus. And it must be a really, really good one, considering it stayed alive for that long. And I think since that story was passed all the way down to us through all those years, I think that means that we need to keep the story alive and keep telling it to people. So just like Paul, as Christians, we're called to tell the story of Jesus to all kinds of people. And we need to pass that story down to our family and friends, just like Paul did. Okay? And that can be hard sometimes. But I know a guy who can help us. And so I think we need to talk to him and ask for his help. So let's pray. Lord, the story of your son is so important and such a good story. And we just want to say thank you for allowing us to know that story. And please help us to be able to pass that story down and continue to tell it. Amen.
When I lived in Florida, I, on a couple of occasions, got to go to the amusement park Busch Gardens. And every time I went there, I made sure to ride this one particular roller coaster, and it's called SheiKra. What I love about Shikra is that there was two lines. One was like the general line that everyone can go in, and then one was a slightly longer line if you want to sit in the very front of the roller coaster. And so I was usually in that line, because particularly in this roller coaster, you wanted to be in the very front. What would happen is it would take you kind of all the way to the top, like many roller coasters do, and then from there, you could see for miles around, because it's Florida, and Florida's very flat. And so from that vantage point, you could just see almost all the way to the Gulf. But then it takes you around a bit of a semicircle to a straight down plunge. Now, I'm not talking like very steep or kind of like that. I'm talking a straight down plunge. What was most fun, though, was right as if you're in the front seat, when you get to the precipice of that straight down plunge, it allowed just the front to then go over and face all the way down, and then it just stopped. So for about 5 seconds, you were simply suspended in the air, looking at where you're about to go. I mean, your whole body shifts forward, so the only thing holding you in is those kind of bars around your shoulders, and you're thinking, what did I just sign up for? Now, of course, after 5 seconds, it would release, and then you plunge straight down and go on with the roller coaster. That was terrifying enough. But then I saw a picture this last week, and this picture would be the only way to make Shikra the roller coaster more terrifying. This picture was on their Facebook page. Let's show it. It's Shikra in the fog. I mean, can you imagine being on that roller coaster at the very, very top and then plunge straight down into the fog where you cannot even see 5 feet in front of you? That would be an even more terrifying way of going on that roller coaster. Now, I am about to compare riding Shikra in the fog in the front seat with living a life of faith. Are you ready? It's going to make sense. It really will. But here's the comparison. When you say yes to faith, when you choose to believe, and when you say yes to God, I mean, doesn't that feel like you're taking a plunge into a whole new way of life? Aren't you taking a plunge into a whole new way of looking at the world and understanding yourself and the people around you? Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard coined a term. He called it a leap of faith. That believing requires a leap of faith, where you can't really just dip your toes in the water of faith and say, I'm going to maybe try this out. No, he said at some point you just need to take that plunge and say, I'm going to take this leap of faith into a life of faith. The hard part, though, is when you take that leap, you still don't have all the answers. I mean, we never have all of the answers about God and about faith, and that's why it's called a leap of faith and not a leap of certainty. But at some point in your life, you've had enough experiences with something you can't explain, enough experiences with the divine, that you say, I'm going to take that leap. Or like the roller coaster, I'm going to take that plunge into a whole new way of living. Well, we're in the middle of our series, and it's a series we've titled Go, and each week you're encouraged to go and do something different. Today, with that in mind, with taking a leap of faith and taking the plunge into a new way of living, with that in mind, what we're going to encourage you to do today is to go and share the gospel. Because the gospel is the foundation of our faith. The gospel is really what we are asked to put our faith into and believe. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to ask you, what is your definition of the gospel? You know, if someone who really didn't have much of a background in faith or church, but they were maybe thinking of taking that leap, if they asked you, what does the gospel mean? how would you define it? Simply keep that in your minds as we get into this story again today, thinking about how we are sent or to go. So if you remember, we are going through the book of Acts. And last week, we had the city of Antioch. We learned all about Antioch and how that became a really missional church. Barnabas was sent to go check out what was going on in Antioch because they were sharing the good news with Gentiles and Jews alike. Then Barnabas saw what was happening and went and found Paul and said, Paul, you need to help me because we've got work to do here. And so then Paul and Barnabas are sent out. So they're sent away from Antioch to go on this missionary journey around the region to basically share the gospel. So that's where our story is going to pick up today. It begins in Acts chapter 13. It says, on the Sabbath, they entered the synagogue and sat down, they being Paul and Barnabas. And after reading from the law and the prophets, the leaders of the synagogue sent word to them, saying, brothers, if you have a word of exhortation for the people, please speak. Well, these leaders of the synagogue, they recognized that Paul and Barnabas were, I guess, a little bit like traveling preachers, where they said, well, you're not from our synagogue. We don't see you every week, but you're kind of well known. So, if you want to stand up and say a few words to our congregation, why don't you do so? If you were in Paul's shoes, what might you say in that moment? I mean, I can imagine myself maybe being a little caught off guard and standing up and saying, oh, okay, thank you for the warm welcome. I look forward to greeting you at the potluck after church service, something like that. But Paul never misses an opportunity. And so Paul decides to take this opportunity to say a word to this congregation, and he's going to preach. He's going to share what he considers the central good news. Here's the next verse. It says, standing up, Paul motioned with his hand and said, fellow Israelites, and you Gentiles who worship God, listen to me. The God of the people of Israel chose our ancestors. Okay, so I read that, and my first question was, I wonder what he did with his hand. I mean, did you notice that? It says, Paul stands up, and he makes a motion with his hand. I just kind of wondered to myself, what was that motion? What did Paul do there? I mean, I imagine when I talk with my kids, I make kind of a shushing motion, like, shh, hey, I'm about to talk here, shh. I'm sure that's not the motion Paul made. Did he stand up and kind of use both his hands and say, hey, shh, I'm about to speak, so let's listen up? Who knows? Who knows what motion Paul made? But what we learn here is that Paul gets the synagogue's attention because he's about to share with them something that he considers of central importance. And what does he share with them? He tells the crowd that God chose them. That's right, that God chose them and God chose their ancestors, the people of Israel. Chose them for what? Chose them to be the group of people from which Jesus, the Messiah, would be born. He could have chosen any group. Really, God could have chosen any group from which Jesus would be born, but Paul's saying, but he chose you. He chose you, and now, in your lifetime, this has come to fulfillment. Jesus has come. Now, Paul goes on in quite a lengthy speech, and I'm not going to read it all for you, but I encourage you, when you get home, look up Acts chapter 13 and see Paul's entire speech, because what he does is he tells them, God chose you, and then starting at the beginning of their history, he goes and shows the many ways that God has been involved in Israel's life. And literally, he tracks it from the very beginning of Genesis, kind of all the way through the Old Testament, which is why we're not going to recap all of that today. But what the central theme of his speech is their chosenness. That God chose you, of which Jesus the Messiah was going to be born from your group of people. And then he gets to the end. After recapping all that history of the Old Testament, after recapping the relationship that this group of people has had with God, he gets to the end, and this is his conclusion. He says, "We tell you the good news." Pay attention to those words. We tell you the good news. What God promised our ancestors, he has fulfilled for us, their children, by raising up Jesus. Okay, now this is the really important part of the sermon here. So if you're watching at home and you're kind of daydreaming about what you might have for lunch today, that's okay, but now's the time to come back, because this is the really important part of this message. Paul shares with them the good news. And what Paul's doing is he's sharing with them the message of Jesus. He calls it good news, and literally, that phrase that he uses when he says, "We tell you the good news," the literal phrase there is gospel. So what you could, and some translations do this, what you could do is say, Paul's saying, "We tell you the gospel." We tell you the good news. Good news and gospel are really hand in hand in translation. So remember at the beginning, I said if someone came up to you and said, "What does the gospel mean?" how would you respond? Well, in one way you could respond, judging from this, is you could say, well, the gospel is the good news. And you would be right. Literally, gospel is good news. But then what if they asked you the follow-up question, oh, great, what's the news? What's the good news? How would you then respond? That's what I want to spend a little bit of time on today. Because Paul, he used his opportunity when he was given a chance to speak to share the entire story of the Old Testament and then summarize that story by saying this is the gospel. This is the culmination of this is the good news. And so for Paul, this was obviously of utmost importance to him. And I believe it is to us as well. What is the gospel? Well, here's my definition of it. I believe that the gospel is the full message of Jesus. The full message of Jesus. And I also believe that the gospel is very often oversimplified. And you miss things. But really, what Paul's talking about here is he recaps this whole history, is saying, no, the gospel is the whole full message of Jesus Christ. The gospel is that God loved this world so much that he sent his only Son into the world to save it. He sent Jesus Christ into this world. And that Jesus then chose to teach and to preach through stories and parables, and even through the way he lived his life in the perfect example of how we can then live our lives as well. But the world did not want to give up its own independence to follow Jesus, to live the way that Jesus was encouraging us to live. And so the world, rather than follow him, put Jesus on the cross. But rather than become angry, God forgave them. And God raised Jesus from the dead. And so all who choose then to follow and to believe in this good news have in the same way gone from death to life. They are literally a new creation. Yes, the gospel is the full message of Jesus. We cannot leave anything out because the gospel is good news. Now, I believe, as I said earlier, that we are told to go and share this good news, to share the full message of Jesus. But it got me wondering, how often have you heard kind of the good news presented more as bad news? I mean, how often have you heard maybe the gospel presented in a way where you go, I don't really think that's very good news. I don't really resonate